We're running it back with another Superflex Rookie Mock Draft. Last week, it was our quick reactions to the NFL Draft. The NFL Draft wasn't even done when we did our first round last week. So starting it off here, second mock draft, more knowledge, had a few drafts. Caleb Williams still going 101 though. Sully, tell us a little bit about why you're taking him at 101 and if you thought about anybody else.
Definitely thought about Marvin Harrison Jr. because I like the talent, but the reality is I do like Caleb Williams a lot. I think he's the best quarterback in this class, so that makes sense. And he landed in probably one of the best two spots. He's surrounded by a ton of talent, probably set up better, like Bryce mentioned in our previous video, than any other 101 quarterback in the recent draft history. So I think Caleb's pretty easy here, and I would think that he's probably going to come in this spot in the vast majority of people's drafts. So I'm very comfortable taking Caleb Williams with the first pick.
Any thought there, Bryce? Would you consider Harrison Jr. over Caleb Williams at 101, or are you strictly Caleb's 101 and go from there?
Yeah, I think there's a slight consideration. I'd be more inclined to maybe trade back to the 102 and maybe even grab something like super later in the draft, like a late second or third or something like that. If I really was 50-50 on either, just because you still get the guy you want and maybe just a little extra draft capital. But in a super flex league, a quarterback setup as well as Caleb Williams is extremely difficult to pass on. I think he and Marvin are relatively bust proof when it comes to a fantasy asset moving forward for the next several years. So you can't go wrong either way, but it's Caleb Williams in this spot for me almost every time.
How far?
About you, Bears fan?
Sorry, how far would you be comfortable trading back if you had the first pick and you were going to give it up?
Depending on how many pieces I got, I really wouldn't want to move outside the top four, maybe even the top five. That's a difficult question. I feel like without like that really depends on your roster for sure. I mean, if you still need a quarterback, you don't want to move past the 103 because I mean, I still think that Jayden Daniels is going to be a really good fantasy asset. It's just I obviously would worry about he is way more. I think it's way more possible he becomes an NFL bust than Caleb Williams. But when you have the rushing ability that he has, he could easily be a top three fantasy quarterback more often than Caleb. It's just the longevity is definitely something to be concerned about when you're talking about quarterbacks that need to run to get a lot of their fantasy value. Typically shorter shelf lives.
Agree.
Yeah, I personally to trade out of one or two, I really want to stay in the top six. Yeah. I want if I'm going to give up a Caleb or a Marvin, I want to get I don't want to name off the people that we have here going in the top six, but I want one of these top six players that go in this draft if I'm going to move off of one of those top two guys. If I'm just moving, like if let's say I am picking one, but I happen to have, maybe I had Joe Burrow last year who was hurt, and, maybe I've got a Trevor Lawrence, and then, maybe I got Brock Purdy late. If I'm sitting in that situation, then really I'm going to try to get the most to move back a spot. But I'll really, when it comes down to it, if I'm on the clock and I haven't got a deal done and I can get anything extra to move down, and I'm confident that person that wants to come up wants Caleb, then I have no problem just taking a little bit of extra and moving back and taking Marvin Harrison instead of, taking him there and eating that value on Caleb's value, the gap there, right? So they're really close. Doesn't take a whole lot of extra if I'm certain that he's gonna. I'm going to get one of those two, then, well, even if I trade and get a little bit of extra and then trade back and they take Marvin, I still got Caleb right there. I can still try to work another trade back or anything like that. So there's a lot of options right there with the top two picks where you can get creative. I tried moving. I had the 102 in a super flex. I tried moving it just to pick up more assets because I'm in a rebuild, obviously, at 102. Didn't work out, so I just took Marvin Harrison at 2, and I'm very happy with that. But Bryce, that's who you take here at number 2. So we've already talked about him a ton. Is there anything that you want to add there with Arizona, Kyler Murray, and that whole duo and situation that they've got going on down there?
No, not really. I mean, the 1-1-1-2 are pretty set in stone for me, and I really don't think they could really change moving forward unless we're hearing some sort of crazy off the field issues, news, some sort of terrible injury. Something like that would have to really change these first two picks for me. Marvin Harrison Jr. set up so well to do good in his first year, and I think he's got the talent to be the top receiver in the NFL. But, even as a fantasy asset, it wouldn't surprise me to see him top 8 his first year. Sully?
I was just thinking as you were talking, I think I have him ranked at 8th in our most recent Superflex rankings that came out as wide receiver 8. So, I don't think I'm not going to nitpick into a guy that we've been talking about for 3 years as being a great wide receiver, because everything I've seen has just told me that he is. So, if I have the first or second pick and I end up with Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm happy and I'm off to the races. So.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I don't even have anything to add, right? He is the Ferrari of this wide receiver class. He can do everything on the field. 102, I'm stoked to get him there when I can. Jayden Daniels. That's why I take it number 3. Again, we know all this, right? Jayden can run. He works real well from the pocket, maybe the most pocket ready quarterback heading into the NFL in this class, which is something that you need. And we don't see a lot of guys with his running ability that are really good from the pocket. A lot of them have to learn that at the NFL level. And I think he is more pro ready in that sense than a lot of the guys that we've seen in recent years, right? That's the knock. That's why Justin Fields isn't the quarterback in Chicago anymore. Didn't anticipate well enough and didn't do what he needed to do in the pocket to save his spot. I think Jayden Daniels is ahead of the curve from the pocket. 103, he's my easy QB2 in this class. Sully, what are your thoughts there on Jayden at number 3?
I like him a lot. And if you look at it as a pure fantasy conversation, I think you can make the argument that he might be the best quarterback in this class from a fantasy production aspect. But what always lingers in my mind is what Bryce says about longevity, and I totally agree with that. One thing I noticed that when I was watching his film is when he pulls it down to run, he almost always runs. So it'll be interesting to see if he can pull it down to run and then get creative and throw the ball on the move, because I think that keeps defenses honest. If he's going to pull it down and run every single time, those DBs are just going to come up and pin their ears back. And like we talked about in the last video, the kid takes some pretty nasty hits. He's going to have to learn to get rid of that football or get down. So, but I think he's like the top picks here are really chalk for me. Like this is exactly how I would pick probably every single time. So,
yep. Bryce, anything to add there?
Yeah, Jayden Daniels easily could be a top fantasy producer every single year as long as his legs stay healthy. But, we've seen these mobile quarterbacks that have the same shelf life as a valuable fantasy asset as running backs do. I mean, just off the top of my head, like a guy like Cam Newton, it's like he was at the top of the rankings for most dynasty leaders. And then when his legs kind of went and they had to rely more on his arm, he didn't have that capability. For right now, Jayden Daniels looks like he has that, but it does help when you're playing with 2 first-round draft picks in college. But, taking all those hits in college also might benefit him for that pocket presence. He can stand in the pocket and make the throw and take the hit, which is things we've seen like some of these quarterbacks like Justin Fields, like you mentioned, didn't have to do very often in college, and it didn't transfer well into the NFL. So he got that experience. One of the first times where maybe getting hit a lot in college might benefit a quarterback. Because I'm not sure really how the Commanders' offensive line is, but I mean, they have got pretty good weapons in the passing game.
It's not good. And I don't know what they did in free agency or the draft, but it was pretty crappy last year. You look at how many times Howell got sacked. I think they led the league in sacks. So he'll be moving.
A bad offensive line's best friend is a mobile quarterback, but still, I mean, he'll still probably take some hits. But he's going to extend it. He's not going to drop to the ground like Brady and Rodgers do when they feel pressure. He's going to try to make plays. So, and that usually transpires into fantasy production. So he's at least set up well in the people he gets to throw to department. So Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin are pretty good options.
Yep.
So we're going to stay in that division, and Sully, you go Malik Nabers here at 104. So my question is, we're talking super flex. Is there any consideration to go QB in this spot, or is how close is a Odunze as the number 2 wide receiver?
Very close, and Nabers is close to Harrison, in my opinion, and that's probably why I give him a little bit of a nod over Odunze. And I guess if I'm trying to get better in the 2024 season, I think Nabers is set up to have a little bit better of a season than Rome as well, just because of the talent in the Bears offense versus the disastrous state of the Giants offense. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Nabers sees upwards of 180 targets this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he revitalizes and save Daniels Jones's career or makes Drew Lock's year. I just think he's that good of a talent. Probably the best yak guy in the class. He can do just about everything at the wide receiver position, tracks the ball well, can run the deep route. You know, you alluded to Daniel Jones being able to throw the deep ball last video. I think he fits that offense there. He can fit it in the slot. He can fit it anywhere. So he's just a really, really good talent. If Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't in this draft, he would be the consensus top wide receiver, in my opinion, with Rome right behind him. So I'm comfortable with Nabers here. My chalk order continues.
All right. Malik Nabers finds himself, I think, in a good spot. I know a lot of people hate the landing spot, and I was hoping to see that in some of these drafts, but he usually went 104, 105 in pretty much every single one of my drafts. But I mean, I think when you land on a team like the Giants, who's going to have a quarterback that's desperate to keep a job in the NFL, they're going to throw to the best player on the team, and the best player now at the receiving position is easily Malik Nabers. Even if Daniel Jones sucks, or Drew Lock takes over and he sucks, we're gonna find the Giants in a different position next year, whether it's going to be with a rookie quarterback or if they try and go after some veteran quarterback to maybe transition into a rookie. I think the quarterback position for them gets better regardless. So the landing spot for Malik Nabers was no concern for me. If anything, I liked it because I think he can make a year one impact for your fantasy team, like Sully was stating earlier. He and Marvin find themselves in spots where they just could easily be target hogs. So I think he's a super talented wide receiver, and I agree completely that if Marvin Harrison Jr. was not in this class, he'd be the clear-cut number 1 for me as well at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he'd be the clear cut because I think all 3 of these top 3 receivers in this class are really freaking good and would be the number 1 in most classes each individually. So, but the other thing you said that it's not even necessarily a disagreement, but you said that he was the best receiving option on the Giants offense. He's the best option in the Giants offense.
Yeah.
He is the Giants offense right now. Like when you look at everybody else on that team, especially if Darren Waller does retire, like people are anticipating, there's not a lot of threats here. We've got a couple, Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe, as a slot. Nabers could be good for him. But they don't have options on this offense. So it's Nabers. It's going to be Nabers targeted a ton. And again, Daniel Jones is a pretty decent deep ball passer. He's had success in that in his career without a weapon like Nabers. So not that I think he's going to hold his job. I do think this is probably Daniel Jones' last year in New York. But at least that connection could bear some fruit this year with Nabers being the only option really for them to go to, and then maybe a volume guy like Wan'Dale Robinson. Next up, Brock Bowers. This is a little kind of switcheroo, a little different than what we've seen last week, but obviously the number 1 tight end in the class. The best tight end prospect I feel I've scouted since I started Dynasty Fantasy Football. Bryce, why are you taking him here? Why are you taking him over some of the other quarterbacks and notably Rome Odunze at wide receiver?
Yeah, tight ends nowadays are playing into their mid-30s. So we get the longevity when you're talking about like some of these positions like quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. So then I go, what kind of player could be like a top player at his respected position? And Brock Bowers could easily be the number 1 tight end in Dynasty Fantasy moving forward. Obviously, Sam Laporta sits atop that throne right now, and it's going to be hard to knock him off of there. But if you're telling me that you think Sam Laporta has more talent than Brock Bowers, I think you'd be lying. I think just Sam Laporta's in a good situation. He's very talented, but Brock Bowers' raw talent is right there with him, if not better. So he finds himself in a situation again where people are like second guessing it because of the quarterback play that they're expecting. But I mean, you're talking about Aiden O'Connell, who's going to be on a short leash. They didn't have much draft capital invested in that guy. If he's not performing well, they're going to throw in Gardner Minshew in there. And Gardner Minshew does like to utilize the tight end. It just didn't have one in Indianapolis. And he had Michael Pittman Jr. playing at a very, very high level last year when it came to fantasy production as well. And I don't see why Brock Bowers couldn't do that same thing. He's not going to have to line up as your traditional tight end on the end of the line of scrimmage. You're going to be able to spread that guy out, move him all over the field, put him in the situations where he can run the routes and get open. And I think it benefits him that they have a guy like Devontae Adams there as well to get most of the secondary's attention, and Jacoby Myers, who had a good season last year as well. I think you got a really nice receiving core here with the Raiders, and Brock Bowers fits in there as coming in as the second best receiving option behind Devontae Adams. Sully, what are your thoughts? Would you take Rome Odunze here, or do you think maybe could it be a team dependent pick here at 5 if you're sitting okay at wide receiver and your best tight end is maybe a guy like, I don't know, David Njoku or something like that?
I think this early in a class that I feel is as deep as this is I just keep taking the best guy I think is available to me at each pick. So I would take Rome here. That said, I don't have a whole heck of a lot of an argument for taking Brock Bowers. I kind of look at the position of where's he going to fall in terms of pass catchers. And in his career, he could be a top 12 wide receiver, right? So that to me warrants this type of draft capital in a Superflex rookie draft. You definitely have to consider the quarterbacks. You definitely have to consider Rome. I think Rome has a higher ceiling overall. That's why I would take him, but I'd be making stuff up if I was trying to argue taking Brock Bowers here. What about you, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite tight end that I've ever scouted, and I've loved Evan Ingram when he was coming out, Dallas Goedert when he was coming out. I mean, I loved the Kyle Pitts talent when he was coming out, but it's the same argument as you and I had on this very show back in 2021 was there's the upside with, and not just Rome in this case, but with some quarterbacks as well.
Yeah.
Is it's going to be hard for him to hit the peak value. And I understand having the best player at tight end, but I want to score points, and top end wide receivers score more points than tight ends. So that's why I would have Rome ahead of him. Same thing, the arguments with the quarterbacks, but he is an elite talent, and it could, if Rome doesn't pan out, or if those quarterbacks aren't franchise quarterbacks, then this could end up winning. But yeah, so I'm going Rome. That's who I go with the next pick at 106. But again, I'm not going to knock Brock Bowers at any point. Just like I didn't knock the talent of Pitts back in when people were deciding him or Chase, right? It wasn't a talent issue. It's just from a straight value standpoint. Like if you're playing the stock market, you're either going to play it safe and take the low floor, less risky option, or you're going to go with what can go nuclear and make me the best multiplier. And I think that's the difference in these situations. So Rome 106, we can say a lot of the same stuff. He's kind of a hybrid receiver. We haven't seen a lot like him with the size, speed, and the route running chops, the contested catching chops. He doesn't drop passes. He tracks the deep ball as well as anybody that I've scouted. Obviously, I'm a Bears fan, so I'm real stoked about him being in Chicago. But the upside here is immense. He could be a wide receiver 1 in his career, and I just absolutely love the talent. So I'm going with him here at 106.
All right, Rome Odunze. Yeah, I think that most people are going to take this guy over my last pick, which is Brock Bowers, which is fine. I understand. When you pair a rookie wide receiver that was highly touted in this really deep wide receiver class with a guy like Caleb Williams, who appears to be a franchise quarterback, the security in that is extremely nice. It's the same reason people really, really loved Jamar Chase after his first year, or even when he got drafted, people already liked it because it appeared that he and Joe Burrow were going to have that connection for a while. I get the appeal between that and Caleb Williams, and I like it as well. So, even though I did take Brock Bowers at the 105 in this mock, in another mock, if I'm okay at tight end, I'll probably take Rome Odunze. So I think these guys can be interchangeable here at these two picks for me personally. I really like the talent, and I really, really like the situation that he finds himself in. I just don't see a situation, unless there's an injury early on, but with either DJ Moore or Keenan Allen, that he's super productive as a fantasy asset your first year. But, if you're picking in the top 5, you might not need that anyway. So that's okay. Because he's set up for the long term, which is nice. So if you can stack him on your taxi squad roster or comfortably sit on your bench while you maybe get an early pick the next year, you could be setting yourself up for success for the following couple of years.
Yeah, this is the pick I would have made in the Bowers spot, but I don't have really much to add that you both haven't alluded to already. I think this is a wide receiver that's entered into a very good situation and that may be a little bit longer to develop into the top pass catcher that we want it to be. But Keenan Allen's most likely out of Chicago at the end of next season. And I think DJ Moore only has a year or two left on his contract as well. So in very short order, you could find Rome Odunze being Caleb Williams' number 1 wide receiver. And I'd like to have that on my roster. So very comfortable with him in this range.
DJ Moore is not going anywhere. He'll be sticking around.
Probably.
But the other thing that I think is underrated here is Odunze is kind of Keenan Allen size and kind of has the route savviness that Keenan Allen does. And then he's got the long speed and deep ball ability of DJ Moore. And he's got both of those guys to mentor him during this rookie season, which I think everybody's talking about how set up it is for Caleb as a rookie coming in, but the same can be said about Rome. When do you get a chance to come in as a rookie, top 10 pick, not be the focal point of that offense right away? Who's the focal point in Arizona? Marvin Harrison Jr.
Totally.
Who's the focal point in New York Giants? Malik Nabers.
Yeah.
Who's the focal point in Chicago? Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. You got guys that you can name that maybe aren't as talented as Rome, but can teach Rome stuff, and he doesn't have to be the focal point of a defense right off the bat, which is a huge, huge advantage, in my opinion, against these other 3 receivers these other 2 receivers that we've talked about here in the top 6. So
I like that a lot, and it reminds me of CeeDee Lamb going to Dallas, and they're the same sort of body style, speed, and ability. And Lamb was insulated by Amari Cooper and to a lesser extent Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz. So I think there's a lot to that. They're setting the guy up for success and not having to be the star of the show on day one. So I like that comparison.
So Sully, here at 107, you go with the hometown kid, JJ McCarthy, Minnesota Vikings quarterback, taken 10th overall in the draft. Sean Payton tricked him into trading up one spot to get him. One of the craziest stories I've ever heard. Sean Payton, something else, but JJ McCarthy, 107. What are you thinking here? And why are you taking him over somebody like Drake Maye, who went number 3 overall to the Patriots?
Yeah. So I mentioned this in our last video. I had JJ McCarthy as my 3rd ranked quarterback coming into the draft, and that's still where he sits. Very similar to Rome Odunze landing in a good spot where he can develop. I think JJ McCarthy has landed in an excellent spot where he can develop. Doesn't necessarily have to be the starting quarterback on day one. Sam Darnold can take that role. Enters an offense with, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, at some point this season, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler in the backfield. Even Josh Oliver is a good secondary pass catching tight end for Minnesota. So I think either quarterback for the Vikings is set up for success here. And I think that eventually this will be JJ McCarthy's job. I like how creative he is. I like how he gets through his progressions. I know he didn't do a ton at Michigan, and I don't really care. It's what you do now and going forward. And he's mobile, can throw on the run, converts 3rd and 4th downs when asked to at the highest level of any of the guys in this class. So very comfortable with him quarterbacking my team at some point. and would be very happy to add him to my dynasty rosters as well, behind the first two quarterbacks that we've talked about.
Bryce.
Yeah, I mean, JJ McCarthy, I think, is a safer pick here at this spot. I'd personally be going Drake Maye, but that's only because I've got ceiling play. And prior to the draft, I had JJ McCarthy as my QB5, and that's I mean, I'm splitting hairs between QB3 and QB5. To be fair, like I don't have either of those guys ranked very differently. Like I would probably put Michael Penix Jr. at 3 with Drake Maye at 4, and then JJ McCarthy at 5 when it came to just like an overall quarterback. When you take into account fantasy, I probably would barely put Drake Maye at 3 above Penix Jr. because he does run a little more. But we find JJ McCarthy in this spot where it could be, I mean, he's set up for success, and I see him as a game manager, but so is Brock Purdy, and look at the kind of fantasy numbers he can put up with all that talent on offense around him. So it wouldn't surprise me if JJ McCarthy could do that as well. It's just, when you look at a guy like Drake Maye, you could see maybe more of like, I don't want to say, Josh, maybe a little bit lesser version of Josh Allen because he can run the ball. He's got that big arm talent. And he was played on a team in college where it's like he wasn't surrounded by a lot of NFL talent, but he showed NFL capability with it. So again, I think it depends on, do you want to take more of a risk and go with the Drake Maye here, or do you want to be more safe and go with a JJ McCarthy? I don't think you can go wrong either way. It's just a preference pick at this point, but JJ McCarthy is definitely set up for success with that talent on that offense.
Yeah, I think people forget how highly touted JJ was coming into college, and I think it's unfair to say he's a game manager. That's just the way Michigan plays ball. That's the way Justin Herbert's going to be asked to play ball in Los Angeles. Now, he's going to have a little more leeway. He's already proven that he can do it in the pros, but that's Jim Harbaugh football. That's been Jim Harbaugh football since he was with the 49ers. We're going to run the ball. We're going to beat you at the line of scrimmage, and they're going to have an efficient passing game. It's not much different than what we see from Purdy. You're right. But that's not Kevin O'Connell. I mean, that's not the Vikings offense. And when I look at the rookie quarterbacks, and the reason why I have JJ over Drake Maye is because JJ has the best receiver out of all these rookie quarterbacks coming in. And he's probably got the best, most proven quarterback coach in O'Connell out of all these rookies. So those two are about the most important things that I could think of outside of an offensive line for a rookie quarterback to come into. So even though I think Caleb Williams has like more volume of offensive weapons around him, when you look at we're 2 tight ends deep, they're both healthy right now, all 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs in the backfield. He's got more talent all around him, but the 2 really key component points is that one receiver that you can really, really count on, which really everybody but Drake Maye has at this point, right? Jayden Daniels has Terry McLaurin. Caleb has Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. JJ McCarthy has Justin Jefferson. Drake Maye is really the only one that's missing that dude. And then the coach, and that's so important. And that'll cover, the next player for me as well. Bryce, you do take Drake Maye at 108. But I think they're both good. Really, the coaching and that number 1 wide receiver is what separates JJ for me. And I do think he's got the arm. He needs to get better with touch. That's what he needs to do when he's throwing the ball. He needs to get better with touch.
I can teach that, though.
Yeah, I would rather, like, we already know he can play within a system. That's important because when you get to the NFL, you have to play within a system. That's my biggest worry about Caleb Williams is, can he play on schedule? That's why I was so hesitant of moving off of Justin Fields. Like, it's the same concerns that we had with Justin Fields. Can they play in the pocket? We know what they can do when they get outside. JJ can even do a little bit of that, right? He's sneakily athletic. He can run the ball and pick you up some points there too. So that's just really where the difference between them two is. Drake Maye is more of a Josh Allen type, and he's got the same concerns as Josh Allen came in. Can he be consistent passer, accurate, all that. We know he's big, physical, he can run, and he's more of a imposing figure than like a Jayden Daniels or a JJ McCarthy when they run. So it is splitting hairs for me between the two, but I'm going to go on most cases. I'd probably go 50-50. Like if I had the same spot where we were in this spot with them two on the board as the next two up, I'd probably go back and forth and get shares of both of them. But that infrastructure that JJ's got with the Vikings is what separates him for me from Drake Maye, because I do think we already know the floor with both of them is probably lower than the other two guys that we talked about from a fantasy perspective, but having that infrastructure is just so important for a young quarterback coming in. So that's the difference there. So Bryce, why don't you tell us a little bit about Drake Maye here? You've already talked about him a little bit, but we'll move through him pretty quick here and then we'll get on.
Yeah, there's not much more to say. I mean, the argument between the two is JJ's got a better foundation and supporting cast around him over Drake Maye. But when it goes to overall talent, when it comes to a fantasy asset, Drake Maye has that ceiling play. So again, I can't fault anybody for wanting to go JJ before him. But when it's coming with these quarterbacks, I'll take the guy that's got who I think has the most the raw talent. Just the caveat with that is that raw talent could fizzle out, a la Zach Wilson, and they might not be a starter after the second year in the league. So,
Sully, anything to add on Drake Maye there?
Just real quick, it's funny you mentioned Zach Wilson because I'm watching all these like combine or pro day workouts for McCarthy, and I'm like, that's the same damn thing that Zach Wilson did, and why are we getting so excited? But if I'm nitpicking and I'm picking between the two and I'm worried about a game manager, Andrew Luck threw 27 passes a game for Stanford, and he was okay. Not to say that JJ McCarthy is Andrew Luck, but to Rick's point, systems are systems. Game managers usually get first downs and score touchdowns, so you can call them whatever you want. I like Drake Maye a lot, and I would be happy if I had to take Drake Maye onto my teams. If I nitpick Drake Maye, I'm a little worried about his feet. He's a little happy-footed in the pocket, but I think that's something, just like I talk about McCarthy and getting touch, you can teach that. So coaching is massive. But yeah, these guys are all good. And of these four quarterbacks we've talked about, I'll happily take any one of them onto my team.
And the thing I do want to mention about this rookie quarterback class is in this really goes for the guy, all six that went in the first round in the top 12. They all seem very, very coachable as well. Like they all seem like they are going to come in and work hard and all that. Now we never know truly until they get into the league and start doing that. But I do think that they're all very coachable. They all have the raw talent. Great arms. We're not talking about any of them not being able to make throws. It's just really, are they going to be willing to do what it takes to develop and become that great NFL quarterback? Next up, 109, I take my number 4 receiver in this class, Brian Thomas Jr., Jacksonville Jaguars, another receiver in this class that's tied to whether Trevor Lawrence has ended up being the top end quarterback that we thought he might be. He's still a good quarterback that's got a long life as a starter, most likely in Jacksonville for quite a long time. So he's tied to a quarterback. They've showed they can be very productive. We've seen Christian Kirk be very productive in this offense. We've seen streaks of Calvin Ridley last year be very productive. Zay Jones has had times where he was very productive. Evan Ingram's had times. So he's coming into a good spot with, Doug Peterson as the coach, good with the offensive side of the ball. And I just think he was the 4th most talented in this class. I thought there was a gap. There was the top 3. There was a gap, Brian Thomas, and then there was a slight gap. And then the rest of the guys came in before the NFL draft. Obviously, some landing spots have changed things in a lot of the drafts that I've been in. But I do think Brian Thomas is the 4th most talented receiver in this group. So I'm taking him at 109. Sully, what are you thinking? Brian Thomas, I know you're not nearly as high on him as I am.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit why.
I try not to let landing spot dictate much to me. I'm more of a draft capital guy, so I'm just going to contradict myself. I just really don't like where he is. I think we saw throughout the season, especially last year, when everyone was healthy in Jacksonville, someone suffered in that offense. Sometimes it was Christian Kirk. Most often it was Calvin Ridley. At times it was Zay Jones. Trevor Lawrence hasn't shown me the ability to support that many guys in his offense. I don't think Christian Kirk is going anywhere. I don't think Evan Ingram is going anywhere, at least not for the near future. And I certainly don't think Trevor Lawrence is going anywhere. If I really nitpick, there's probably 2 or 3 guys that I like in this class that I feel are better route runners and more of overall wide receivers than Brian Thomas Jr. But this kid's good, and he's going to be good. So this isn't don't draft him. It's just, for me, I'd take him a little bit later. But I don't have a whole lot to argue with you on your spot. I think for the longest time, he was my 4th guy in my rankings as well. He's slipped a little bit, but he's still a first-round Superflex talent, I believe. What about you, Bryce?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with Rick here. I just put one other receiver in this tier with him, which is the next guy we talk about. And I like the landing spot for Brian Thomas Jr. in all reality. I think he could easily, he goes to this team and he doesn't have to be the number 1 right away. And he's set up to take over as the number 1 as the season progresses. You know, you got Gabe Davis there and Christian Kirk, who I don't think are suited to be the best options on a team that's supposed to be competing at a high level, but like, you know, the year prior, Christian Kirk was putting up good numbers. It just their offense wasn't like that exciting, and I think that Brian Thomas Jr. can take over as that best option, and then we'll more often see that Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk are the ones suffering more than Brian Thomas Jr. Maybe as the season progresses, and definitely more next the following season. So I like the landing spot. I think it's splitting hairs between him and the next pick, which ends up being Xavier Worthy. But I like him. I like him a lot. I don't think this is a bad pick either way you go.
Brian Thomas is more talented than Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk as
Yeah.
soon as he steps on the field.
Yeah, but he's not.
but
But,
Gabe
the
Davis
same thing
is
with
doing,
Rome
like-
Odunze. He doesn't have to take over right away because there's veterans there.
Right. But I'm saying that his ascension is quicker than Rome Odunze's
Yeah.
probably, because
for sure. Yeah, I see it this year.
They're-
Where Odunze I see more of like next year.
I think Odunze is going to be involved from the get go when you take somebody 9 overall. But I would rather have, if I'm taking a QB or a wide receiver and he only has to compete with Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis, I feel pretty good about that if I like the player. And that's the one thing there in Jacksonville, is that he doesn't have to jump a lot of people or a lot of talent, that is, to be.
Yeah, he could
there.
become a focal point much quicker. I agree with that, which could suck, but
Could
I
be
don't
day
think he
one.
walks in week 1.
I think that hurts
I mean,
him
it
more
could
than it
be. I
helps.
just don't. I don't think it'll be day 1. I think it'd be.
I
closer to,
don't
like,
know.
week 3 or
I don't know
4.
why we use that argument against him when we're sitting here talking about Nabers and the opportunity he's got in New York, coming in being the dude right away again.
Yeah.
Brian Thomas isn't Malik Nabers. He isn't as good as Malik Nabers, but he's not that far behind. Like, the separation is not that big from those top 3 to him as it is from, I believe, Thomas to like the next group of guys. And the group that's with Thomas, right? The Xavier Worthies and stuff that you have in there. I think there's a similar gap between them and Ricky Pearsall, and then the next receivers in the group too. So it's not that I think they're that close, but they're not that far away either. And I don't understand how we can use that as a positive for one and then a negative for Thomas Jr. when Thomas Jr. even has a better quarterback than what Nabers has in
Today,
New York.
for sure.
So
I don't think it's a positive for Nabers' development. I think it's more of a positive for Nabers being a fantasy asset right away. In just as a fantasy asset, because he's just going to be a target monster. That's all. That's what I would put it as.
And one guy's been an
targets
alpha,
are
one guy
value.
hasn't. And I think there's something to be said for that too, right? Like Nabers has been the alpha in that offense, and Thomas has been riding shotgun, and he's going to have to do that in Jacksonville to start. I think if he all of a sudden becomes the alpha in that offense with the limited route tree that he has or appears to have, I'm not going to say he doesn't, because he wouldn't be the first guy coming out of college, and he wouldn't be the first guy coming out of that school that we thought had a limited skill set that turned out to be really good. Again, I don't dislike him. I just like a couple of guys a little bit better. And I think you're right, Rick. I think there's probably not a massive difference from Nabers to Odunze to Thomas. There is, in my opinion, but I don't think it's catastrophic, right? So we'll see what plays out.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Like, AJ Brown, who'd he play with in college?
DK Metcalf.
DK Metcalf, right? Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Look at all the receivers coming out of Ohio State. We're making the argument that he wasn't the alpha, so that's a knock on him. But Marvin Harrison wasn't the alpha when he first came in. You had Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and going back to the Clemson days when Clemson had the DeAndre Hopkins and there was the Mike Williams and all the receivers that came out of there that were on the same Martavis Bryant was on that team. They had so it's hard for me to say, well, he wasn't the alpha, so can he do it? Well, yeah, it's not his fault that one of his teammates was a beast, right? Like
totally.
I wish I would have looked back on the draft with Justin Jefferson, right, and thought differently, because that's my thought at that point is, well, this dude wasn't even the best receiver on his team. Why am I going to put him over? I had Jalen Reagor ahead of him. And the argument was because he wasn't the number one on his team.
But the Philadelphia Eagles had Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. The Minnesota Vikings, Mike Zimmer didn't start him till week 3 of the regular season. Like, we don't necessarily know what we don't necessarily know. And I think you're 100% right, but you can also make the argument for like the Terrace Marshalls of the world that weren't the alphas in that offense and got to the big show and just couldn't produce. There's probably more of those guys than there are. But that doesn't mean Thomas isn't talented.
Okay, but here's the other thing is we've talked a lot about infrastructure and how many of these receivers. We talk about how teams ruin quarterbacks, but we don't talk about how teams ruin wide receivers.
Sure.
For example, Terrace Marshall, don't know, maybe he never would have been good, but that situation in Carolina when he came in, I mean, it's the same situation that we talked about DJ Moore not being able to reach his ceiling early in his career because of the inefficiencies of their offenses too. I don't think we have that. Like if he was coming in and it was Trevor Lawrence's rookie year in Jacksonville, I would have more of those concerns than I do now.
I don't want to turn this into the vocal point of this show, but DJ Moore got targets when he was in Carolina, right? Like Terrace Marshall didn't. And to me, talent earns targets, right? Like if I have a situation where I have Drake London and I have Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder airmailing and throwing this guy 40% catchable passes, I don't lose faith in the talent of that wide receiver. But when I have Terrace Marshall, who is running out against Adam Thielen, DJ Shark, Shi Smith, and he can't get on the field and get consistent targets, that's more of a red flag of a player not being up to the level of competing.
But he was ruined before that.
That doesn't make Brian Thomas Jr. Terrace Marshall. It's just a counter to your argument about not being the alpha. That's all.
So Xavier Worthy's up next at 110 since we spent so much time on Brian Thomas here. And we only have, like 26 more picks to get through in this video.
Should be fast.
So Xavier Worthy, Sully, you take him at 110. I'm assuming you have him ahead of Brian Thomas, and why is that?
He's my number 4 wide receiver in this class because he's incredibly talented. I defer to route runners, and I think he's a vastly superior route runner, and he has the best quarterback. So it's as simple as that. I think he's also in a good situation where Hollywood Brown helps him out. Travis Kelce obviously helps him out. Rashee Rice, depending on when he gets on the field, you might be looking at Worthy being the number 4 guy in that offense to start, which, again, I don't think is necessarily a terrible thing. In Dynasty, I'm willing to wait a little bit longer for Odunze and Xavier Worthy and guys like that. So I think he's a better wide receiver all in all, especially when you factor in the quarterback. So that's why I'll take him here. Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you pair all those attributes you said with also the speed that he comes with and the bazooka that Pat Mahomes does have. It just makes it all better. And, I think we've been evaluating players that land on the Chiefs for the past 3 years now. I think people, last year evaluated Rashee Rice appropriately because of like the Sky Moore and the CEH from the years prior. And I think now it's like, for me, Xavier Worthy's being like people are treading with caution because of that. But I think he is one of the best route runners in this draft class, and that's the biggest thing for me, which is just why I barely like him more than Brian Thomas Jr. I like Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't drop the ball. That's his best attribute, and I do like hands as well. That's one thing that usually translates well into the NFL. But I'm splitting hairs with these guys, and oftentimes if I do have like the previous pick, I probably would 50-50 it. But I guess if I had to pick one, I like this guy 51 out of 100 times more than Brian Thomas Jr. So I think this guy could easily be a touchdown monster. And if you're drafting late, like this is 110 that we're picking here, or 110.
110.
You're probably in a good situation where you don't need to start a rookie wide receiver right away. And by the time that I think he does come along, which will be later in the season, like we kind of saw with Rashee Rice, then he adds a real big boost to your probably already pretty good fantasy roster.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even gonna argue against Worthy in this spot. There's a lot of upside. I'm just glad we haven't seen him jump to the 105, 106 range. I'm glad we didn't see him jump ahead of a Nabers, right? We've seen these mistakes. CEH going from the number 9 rookie overall before the NFL draft to being a top 12 startup pick that year simply because he was drafted by the Chiefs. So I do like that we've kind of kept it within the realm of reality with Worthy's production or with Worthy's value in rookie drafts, because we could have seen him go nuclear and been Marvin. I would not have been surprised if it went Harrison, Nabers, and then Worthy ahead of guys like Odunze and all these quarterbacks and Brock Bowers. That would have been a little asinine to me. So
I'm not looking at him
palatable.
at 9.
So I do think Thomas is more talented overall as a receiver. Worthy obviously has a lot of good things and is with a good team that can develop him and do the right thing. So there's so much upside there. So no argument with me on Worthy at 110. Next up is Bryce is Bo Nix, quarterback, Denver, 12th overall. Why you taking him here? And was there anybody else that you considered?
No, not really. I mean, we're talking about this is crazy that we're talking about a quarterback that was drafted in the first round at pick 12 or 13, and we're getting him at the very end of the very end of the first round in a Superflex Rookie Mock Draft, which is, and in real drafts, which is just crazy to think that's how talented this draft class is. And you're really set up real nice. Like there's no better year to win a league, it seems like, than this past season, because you're getting such good talent. You're getting talent that you would normally find in the first 4 or 5 picks in most regular years draft at the very end of the first round this year. I mean, Bo Nix, sure, I guess his knock is that he played in college forever, right? Because he was like one of those guys that got the extra seasons because of COVID. But I mean, he ended on a high note. If Jayden Daniels just wasn't playing at an astronomically crazy level, Bo Nix would have been the Heisman winner. I mean, this dude's interception to touchdown ratio was absolutely ridiculous. I guess his knock is that we find himself on a team where he doesn't have a lot of talent to throw to, but Sean Payton has had a pretty good history of developing, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Drew Brees. So maybe he can do that same thing with Bo Nix, especially a guy that doesn't turn the ball over. So this is just an easy value. I mean, it's crazy that you just get an easy value pick at the end of a first round in a Superflex draft. Sully, any thoughts on Bo Nix?
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? Like, I don't think that Denver made a good pick taking Bo Nix where they did. But if they didn't, the Raiders were right behind him, and they were going to take Bo Nix. So that, I guess you kind of have to take the guy if you want to take the guy. The other argument you can make is, well, Bo Nix had a low ADOT at Oregon, right? Like, all he did was throw quick outs to Bucky Irvin and to Troy Franklin. Well, so now he does that to Javonte Williams and to guess who? Troy Franklin. And he plays for a guy who has a system that runs a low ADOT like that Drew Brees guy did. So you're getting a starting quarterback with the 11th pick in a Superflex draft. Just click the button and move on and smile, because this is great value. And as much as I really don't like the quarterback, I would make this pick 100% of the time.
What does Sean Payton want? An accurate quarterback that gets the ball out quick. And that's Bo Nix. Accurate, doesn't turn the ball over a lot. What was it, 45-3 touchdown interceptions last year. And you're right, they don't have like the top end talent that we've talked about with some of these other, with Caleb and even Jayden and Washington. They don't have the top end talent at wide receiver like that, but they do have Cortland Sutton. Tim Patrick for 4 weeks this year was a guy that is real good when he's on the field. His teammate Troy Franklin, Mims, who they've wanted to have be somebody for a while now, and then at running back they've got pieces. They're McLaughlin can catch it out of the backfield. Javonte Williams, I think Audric Estime, rookies there, so they've got a deep running back room. There's talent around him. But it is going to be that high completion percentage passing game that we've seen in Sean Payton run. And whether you like it or not, like he had Russ playing well. Russ was 28-6 or something touchdown interception. Even though they decided to move on from him. It's one of the most odd things I've ever seen.
If Russ was making different amounts of money and his contract was different, I don't think they move on from him. But they just needed to get out from under that monstrosity of a contract.
But you had to pay $85 million in dead money, and you could have just had him this year and then got rid of him. Like you didn't have to get rid of him last year. But they got their guy at 12, right? And Bo Nix. So, a lot of people aren't real high on him, and they talk about how old he is. I don't give a shit. If my quarterback got to play as much football as him before he came into the league, that's what I want, right? That's why I want guys to sit. They're not ready when they come in when they haven't played enough. He's got the experience. The game probably moves faster for him than it does other people. And even if he's 26, you got another 10 years with the guy.
Quarterback, not a running back. Who cares?
Kirk Cousins is 36 coming off of an ACL and got $180 million for 4 years. Like there's plenty of time to get the value out of Bo Nix, even though he's been in college for so long. So the key, and this can be said for any of these guys. A lot of these guys are older right now coming out. If they can do the job, it doesn't matter if they're older when they come out. That just means they're more experienced, should be more polished. Ricky Pearsall, I'm going to be straight up. This is my pick. You're probably not going to have to pick him here because he's went at 205, 206, 207 in different drafts that I've been in, the 4 that I've been in. But this is where I like him. I think we are talking about a very talented wide receiver that can do a lot of different things, that gets drafted by a team that doesn't miss when they put high draft capital into receivers. And people always question him. Deebo Samuel. You had a few people that were like, this dude is one of the most athletic guys that have ever come out, but he's raw and it's going to take some time. Brandon Ayuk came out. You heard a lot of the same stuff. Like he's a good route runner, but he's kind of raw. And they had some mental concerns with him. And then we seen it play out where he got into the doghouse there in San Francisco, but since he came out of it, been lights out. So I trust them when it comes to picking the talent at wide receiver, and pretty certain one of those guys is going to be gone going into the 2025 season. So Ricky Pearsall in a situation kind of like Rome Odunze, where he's got 2 guys that he can learn from, learn new tricks from, not be the guy, and then move into a bigger role in year 2. Ricky Pearsall is easily first-round talent in Superflex drafts for me, but the beautiful thing is you're going to be able to get him into the second round. But as a champion, if I can add him to that roster and I don't have to, and he gives me some second, half value. We know Deebo misses time almost every year. So Ricky Pearsall, man, I think he's the biggest value in rookie draft so far from what I've seen in the drafts that I've been in. Bryce, I know you like him as well. What do you think here with Ricky Pearsall, or do you like the lad McConkeys and Keon Coleman's ahead of him?
I think I like Lad McConkey better, but I don't like Keon Coleman better. I know that the situation for both of those guys, as it appears right now, seems better. And when you're talking about their path to targets and maybe being a contribution to your fantasy team right away, but like you just said, you're at the 112 right here. You probably don't need an immediate starter for your fantasy team right away. So get the guy you like. So Ricky Pearsall here doesn't bother me whatsoever. Maybe you don't have a second round pick or your second round pick's at 212 and you don't have enough stuff to give up to maybe move up to get him later. So I have no problem taking any guy that is still falling in the second round at the very, very end of the first. Because again, this draft class is so deep. I mean, I really liked him because I was watching film. Dude can make like the crazy highlight catches, really good route runner. The one thing that catches me is like, I'm not a pro football player and I'm not a pro football scout. But when I watch other scouts and other players react the way CJ Stroud did when he got drafted by the Niners in that draft, it gets me excited for it, especially a guy like CJ Stroud who also really wanted Tank Dell. And look what he did just in the year one prior to his injury. So you're looking at people that are working with these guys and see these guys play every day of their lives. And that's literally their livelihood. I'm going to take their opinion more than I'm going to take mine or any of yours. No offense.
Wow.
So yeah, I really like this guy. I really like this guy. He played on a Florida team that just didn't have I feel like get a lot of looks maybe because they didn't have like a flashy quarterback or they weren't that flashy, but this guy could very well become a valuable piece to this team year one, even though he was taken in the first round. So he's going to get on the field, but man, looking into 2025 season, he could be climbing up up dynasty rankings fast. Sully.
Yeah, I think he's my 7th ranked wide receiver in this class, which speaks way more to this class than it does to this player. I think he's the 6th wide receiver that we've just taken in our first top 12 picks here. I have the guy I'm going to talk about next, one spot ahead of him, but I kind of echo everything that you guys say.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really, really cool about Ricky Pearsall, where he landed, is Ricky Pearsall's weird. He likes to block and he likes to get involved in every play. That is a Kyle Shanahan dream. He's going to manufacture touches for this kid because of his willingness to do whatever he has to do. You will see Pearsall used on jet sweeps and stuff out of the backfield, just like Deebo Samuel is. And he's not as thick as Deebo, and he's not necessarily that style of wide receiver, but he's the perfect guy to slide into, like Rick said, when Deebo eventually misses a game or two with a hamstring injury. So Pearsall's really rock solid. And yeah, if you haven't seen some of his highlight catches, go look at them. They're ridiculous. He's made some of the best catches I've seen maybe ever. So he's fun to watch. I like him a lot.
So next up, you're going Lad McConkey at the 201, Sully.
Yeah.
I'm assuming I'm not assuming, you literally just told us you had this guy ahead of Ricky Pearsall. So why do you have him ahead of Ricky Pearsall? And I'm hoping you say it's more than just the landing spot and opportunity.
It's route running. I just dig route runners, and that's not to say Pearsall isn't a good route runner, but I think McConkey is one of the best route runners in this class. I have McConkey really close to Brian Thomas. That's how much I like him. Great route runner, good teammate, good hands, good spot. The Chargers are not going to throw the ball 600 times this year, but when they do throw it 490 times, there's not a whole lot of guys throw the football to there right now. So I do think that benefits him as well. And he seems to be sort of that, and maybe I'm just reading too much into the tea leaves, but he seems to be, that style of coach's kind of wide receiver. So I think the Chargers played it well when everybody was kind of thinking that they would go Nabers early. They went with the lineman, and then they backfilled with the wide receiver in round 2. So I think they have a lot of value for this player, and I like him a lot. So I'm, especially in round 2 here, I think it's a slam dunk pick. What about you, Bryce?
Yeah, I like Lad McConkey a little bit more than Ricky Pearsall. I kind of put them in their own. Those two, along with Keon Coleman, in their own tier with Lad McConkey at the front of it. And the same reason, we didn't get to watch him play a full season at Georgia this last year due to injury. But I think this guy's got a really high football IQ and high awareness, along with the really, really good route running. So those are the things I look for when I'm scouting these wide receivers. Is route running, like I've said multiple times, like you just repeated. So I put him in there because of that. I think he's got really good spatial awareness, especially against zone coverage. And, when you pair that with the landing spot, it does help because he could put an immediate impact on your fantasy team year one, which, you might not need, but it's still kind of cool to see when your draft picks right away are producing for you.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to him. From what you guys have said, I have him right in this range as well, and I don't think that he's, I have Pearsall ahead, but I have Pearsall like real close to the Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas range. Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about an offense that's going to be efficient, and all you got to do is be an efficient receiver to end up being a very integral part of this offense with Jim Harbaugh running it. And we know Quentin Johnston wasn't reliable. Palmer has been when given the opportunities, but I still think there's an actual raw talent gap between the two of those, McConkey and Palmer. So McConkey could become the number one in this offense very, very quickly, which would be a huge boost to his dynasty value. But the next guy, another guy that's real close, is Keon Coleman. Bryce, you take him. Buffalo Bills, obviously one of the best interviews out of this rookie class. Just great kid. It's hard not to like the kid, right? But why are you taking him here? And do you think that it's disrespectful to Stephon Diggs that they let him just take that number 14 immediately after getting drafted? Because that's what the talk is on Twitter now.
I mean, you didn't play in Buffalo long enough to constitute getting your number to be. I mean, Drake May's coming in taking Max Jones' number, and I love it. But I mean, who cares? They're numbers.
Wait. Did we just compare Mac Jones to Stephon Diggs?
Well, I'm just saying, you weren't that. It's not like you won a Super Bowl. What did you really accomplish there in Buffalo, except maybe some headaches here and there? But I mean, I like Stephon Diggs. Don't get me wrong. I think he's super talented, and I don't look at wide receivers when they want the ball as more divas of they want to be a part of the offense, really. But no, I don't look at it as disrespectful that way. But his interview is funny. I think his character is something that people love right away. And then when you step into a situation like Buffalo, whose wide receiver core has been completely decimated this offseason, with a guy that was, prior to this last college football season, touted as arguably one of the better wide receivers, and it falls in the regular draft all the way to the second round, that raises some concern for me. I'm much more concerned about wide receivers who are projected to be really high that kind of fall as the season goes on. So there is some concern with Keon Coleman for me, which is why I do rank him last in that Ricky Pearsall, Ladd McConkey tier for me personally, because those two other guys climbed as the season went. Well, they didn't really climb because Ladd McConkey was kind of hurt, but Ricky Pearsall climbed as the season went on. It seemed like where Keon Coleman fell. But opportunity is there, and you got Josh Allen on an offense that can score. You can only be excited. So anybody who's getting him here early in the second round is very, very happy with it. They're not really thinking too much about it because I don't think it's necessarily a risky pick. So situation's great. Raw talent is there. Let's see if he can put it together on the football field because he's kind of known for taking plays off. Sully.
It's interesting to me. There's another wide receiver here that I just have a little bit of doubt about and no real tangible reasons for it other than gut feel. I just know that, from doing hit rate articles for 5+ years, that not all these guys are going to hit, right? So it's who isn't going to hit? And now this is our wide receiver 8 or 9, and he's still really freaking good, right? The thing I like about Keon Coleman more than anything and where he ended up in Buffalo is this guy's probably the best high pointer in this class, and he probably has the best quarterback for just chucking the damn thing up and letting him go get it. So I think that will benefit. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Buffalo this offseason. They're just weird. I think they've made a lot of really questionable moves. They added Chase Claypool because, I don't know, they needed somebody to get stuff off the top shelf in the locker room. I don't really understand why he's there. But Keon Coleman's going to get targeted. I just think the targets are going to go down in Buffalo. Good wide receiver. This is the 2-2. Guys, the number of guys I've taken in Superflex leagues since I've been playing it in the second round that I don't even know who they are anymore is a long list. So Keon Coleman is talented enough to warrant this pick. I just have a little bit of doubt. Like Bryce said, he'd be at the back of that tier with all those guys for me, but still like him a lot. He's good.
Yeah. At one point, this guy was in the conversation as a top 3, top 4 in this class.
Sure
and the thing that he doesn't do as well as a lot of these other guys is separate, but people forget that wide receivers win in different ways. And he's a guy that's going to win contested balls, those jump balls. That's him, right? Like, think DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins, as he progressed through his career, became better at getting open and becoming a high volume guy. But when you're talking about Gabe Davis had success with Josh Allen, kind of the same way. Not a great route runner, deep threat, probably separated a little bit better, but wasn't as physical and I don't think he's nearly as raw talented as Keon Coleman is. And we saw him have some success, and we saw him jump, from year 1 to year 2, going up the draft boards heading into the season and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of upside here. Next up, this pick, last week's discussion on this was way more intense than it needed to be, but at 203, I'm going with Michael Penix Jr., another guy that I consider as high as the 111 and 112. If I'm in a spot where I know I'm going to need, like if I have Matt Stafford and Aaron Rodgers in a super flex, even if I have a third guy that's young, I'm starting to look, okay, well, I've got 1 to 2 years with these guys probably. In that spot, I could see myself taking Michael Penix and waiting for the 2 years, because it's probably going to be 2 years, and then they're going to get out of the Cousins deal. And Penix will be the starter there in 3 years. And the same thing that we were talking about, Bo Nix, another guy, he had a lot that went on in college. I think he's just as talented as everybody behind the Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. So the JJs and Maye, and I think he's more talented than Bo Nix. So it's just a waiting game on him. And most of the drafts that I've been in, he's went in the second. I think he did go first in one of the super flexes. But if I'm in that situation where I know I'm going to need quarterback later, and I know my team's too good to be picking at the top of next year's draft with a limited quarterback class, then I'm willing to take him at the end of the first and wait the 2 years. We'll go with Bryce first, because I know me and Sully got heated on this last week. So we'll let Bryce go first. Then we'll see if me and Sully can strike up another hot debate.
Yeah, I really liked Michael Penix Jr. As I said earlier, I had him as my third favorite quarterback in this draft class. I think a lot of people, really judged him on one game against Michigan in the national championship, and I think it just kind of diminished all the things that he achieved earlier in the season on a consistent basis. I think he's coming into the league as the second best actually passing quarterback. So it does suck to see him land in a spot where he has to sit for 2 years, because I do think he's NFL ready. I really wanted New England to trade back and get him. Obviously, it wouldn't have felt like that, because we would have traded back further than 8 if that was the case. But him here in Atlanta, waiting 2 years, it's okay, because this is still early in the second round. Maybe your roster can wait a couple of years before it starts to compete. But he's also one injury away from making this one of the most valuable second round picks in any super flex draft you might ever see. So I really like this guy. I think he could come into the league and make a splash right away, but we're just finding him in a spot where that's probably not going to be the case.
And I do want to say real quick before we get into Sully, that not only is he one injury away, but that injury may have already happened. And people keep forgetting this. We're talking about a 36-year-old Kirk Cousins coming off of an ACL injury. We don't know how that's going to work. So, I'm not saying that it's going to go that way, but this is also an insurance policy against that while your team, even though you do have holes, is ready to compete in that division. You have to protect yourself, because if you end up in the same situation, if Kirk Cousins isn't ready, or that injury doesn't heal the way that it's going to, or if he just doesn't play the same as he did before because he is 36 coming off of an ACL. It's the same thing in New York, right? Like the same thing with Rodgers. We don't know how that's going to play out. Now, these guys are healing better now than they have in the past, but that is still a factor in this whole thing, whether people want to talk about it or not. Sully, sorry.
No reason to apologize. So there's two different pieces of this puzzle for me. So Michael Penix Jr., the player and the prospect, I like. Arguably is the best arm talent of any quarterback in this class, especially on the deep ball. He's ridiculously good. There's also the factor that he is a little older, and we don't care too much about that, but he's older. Like he could be 28 when he's a starting quarterback. That's a little concerning. He also has, I believe, 4 season-ending injuries in his college career, which is a bit of a red flag for me. That said, I think if Kirk Cousins didn't exist in Atlanta, he would easily be my 4th quarterback in this class, and he might even be my 3rd quarterback in this class. But here's where it becomes the fantasy asset for me. I'm not drafting Michael Penix Jr. unless he falls to the 3rd round. I also know that means I will have 0 shares of Michael Penix Jr., and I'm okay with that. Michael Penix Jr. this time next year, I believe, without a doubt, will be much more of a affordable fantasy asset to obtain because his value will decline as he sits on the bench behind Kirk Cousins for 1 year. And yes, Kirk Cousins is 36 years old. And yes, Kirk Cousins is coming back off an Achilles. But Kirk Cousins has this much injury history in his career other than this Achilles, which is a massively freak injury. And Kirk Cousins isn't Aaron Rodgers, and Kirk Cousins isn't Lamar Jackson. We're not looking for Kirk Cousins to scramble all over the place. We're looking for Cousins to take a couple of steps back, continue to be one of the best play-action quarterbacks in the NFL, and throw out all the talent on the field. So Michael Penix Jr., unless Kirk Cousins gets hurt, or Terry Fontenot gets sacked, or Arthur Blank goes ludicrous, is not playing in the first season for sure, probably not the second season, and maybe not even into his 3rd, depending on how well Atlanta and Kirk Cousins are doing. So I'm 100% out on Michael Penix Jr. because of his situation, not because of the player.
Here's the argument that I have against that.
Okay.
That he's going to be less valuable in a year. See, I think it's all baked in because that's why he's going where he's going now, is because people know they are going to be waiting on him. And really, whether you are picking him at 111, 112, knowing you're going to have to wait the 2 years because you're competitive, or you're picking him at 201, 22, 23, where you're not very good, you almost don't want that production from him so that you can continue that rebuild. So I don't think he's going to be less valuable because everybody that's picking him now knows it's probably going to be at least 2 years before I get anything out of him. So I think that's going to be baked in. I don't think people aren't going to be freaking out, right? It's not like if he would have got drafted to, for example, what is going to be more hurtful if JJ McCarthy doesn't start at all because Sam Darnold actually plays well and they're winning, or Michael Penix doesn't play because Kirk Cousins is there and he plays the whole season. JJ McCarthy is going to get hurt way more in that scenario than Michael Penix is going to get hurt.
No, we're okay with a rookie sitting for a year, most of the year, but not.
But the difference is you're taking JJ McCarthy at 106, 107 in a stacked draft class.
Yeah.
You're taking Michael Penix in the 2nd round of a stacked draft class. That's the other reason why I think the value doesn't drop as much, because we're also talking about next year, we're going to go in a class where we're debating Quinn Ewers and Shadur Sanders and, that at quarterback, that, and it's not going to be as deep from the offensive side of the ball. There's probably going to be more defensive players in there. We're going to have more running backs in there. So getting that quarterback is just going to be harder. So I don't think he's going to lose value because I think people are already prepared for his situation. Whereas we're not prepared for any of these other quarterbacks to sit for an entire year. We're pretty certain all of them are going to start by week 4 to 8, right?
Fair, but I'd be happy if McCarthy didn't.
No, and I understand that, but not from a fantasy owners aren't going to react that way. You are, because you're a Vikings fan that wants the development of
We
JJ to
could
work
do a
as
show
best
on
as
this
possible.
alone, and you're not wrong. I guess it all depends on where I am as a fantasy roster, right? I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, if I'm taking McCarthy at 6, my team's probably not a McCarthy away from winning anything anyway, so I'm okay with that year. But I get it. I totally get it. It's just a personal thing for me. I'm just out on Michael Penix, and I wish him well in his 4th year or whatever.
No,
that's all.
That's fine. Just counterpoints to what you were saying.
Totally, and I agree with everything you're saying.
Jonathan Brooks, 204. Sully, this is your pick. First running back off the board. I will say that he has went as high as the first round in some of my classes. Me personally, I do like him as the number 1 running back in this class. I do like that he's going to Carolina, where the 2 running backs ahead of him, Miles Sanders, was just dog water last year. And Chuba Hubbard is, I feel, just a guy. That sounds very, I always hate using that because obviously these guys are phenomenal professional running backs, but 204, first one. I'm the wide receiver guy. I'm not taking these guys in the first round either, but why are you taking him here, Sully? And is there any other running back that you consider ahead of him?
Yeah, so I'll make this pretty quick. The value at this pick at 204, I think, is excellent to take this player. The things you alluded to, I like where he is in Carolina. He's going to have a path to touches. I think he's the best running back in this class. I think if he played in any other university other than Texas behind guys like Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson that he probably, and didn't tear his ACL, I think this guy would be a slam dunk earlier first round pick in dynasty drafts regardless. So I like him a lot, but I also like the next guy we're going to talk about a lot. I would take either one of them in this spot. Happy to add this guy, even though I'm not a big runner. I'm very much like you. I'd rather add other positions when I'm rebuilding my roster, but value's value. And if I can turn him into something, great. And if I keep him on my roster, that's great too. Bryce.
So Bryce,
sorry.
Hold on. With the next pick, you take Jonathan Brooks. So
Trey Benson.
Trey Benson. I mean Trey Benson.
Right.
So my question is, with Trey Benson going 205, are you taking him ahead of Jonathan Brooks, or are you sitting on that spot right there and Sully takes Jonathan Brooks and then you're going, you sniped me? Is that what you're doing?
Probably. I mean, again, it's super roster dependent, but if I feel like I've got a decent team and like I'm a running back away, I've only got like maybe 2 running backs and I need kind of a third one for bye weeks or flex plays or things like that. I really want Jonathan Brooks because he's the only running back in this draft class as of right now, no injuries happening, has the best path to be a decent fantasy, startable fantasy asset. Sorry. So yeah, I do. I want him more than Trey Benson because I think it's James Conner's job to lose, and as long as James Conner stays healthy, he produces really well. So Trey Benson's not going to steal that from him. I don't think he might as the season goes on. But yeah, I really like Jonathan Brooks, and I'll preface this by saying, from picks like basically 203 to 208, I think almost all of these guys for me personally can be interchangeable, and there's not a really good argument either way. It's just between 203 and 208, it's like I kind of would almost put Benson a little bit further back. And the only reason I drafted him right after Sully did is because that Jonathan Brooks went right there. So it's like talent wise, I think in the second round, you can kind of draft for team needs. So if you really need running back, even though you might like some of these wide receivers better, I think that it's not a bad idea to take some running backs just because of how thin they are this draft class. Next year might be a little bit different, but with some of these wide receivers, I also have a little more concern than the ones we've already drafted.
Yeah.
I want to clarify that when I talk about the wide receivers, I'm talking about, we've seen Jonathan Brooks go in the first round of drafts. I have in some of my drafts.
I have too.
I'm not
drafting him in the first round.
I'm not taking him over the Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall, Lad McConkeys. Yep. I'm not taking him over there, so he's not going to be a first-round pick for me in any drafts. So that's what I meant, not the second-round receivers.
Right.
I think he stacks up well out after you get past Keon Coleman with any of the other receivers that are in this round. So I wanted to clarify that in case I was misunderstood. I meant the first-round receivers.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to sacrifice adding them to add Brooks.
I think
I agree 100%.
safe to say that Brooks and Benson probably, when rookie drafts conclude, their ADP will be back end of first round. I think both of them will. And I almost envy Bryce being able to take Benson here because I think I'm going to wait in my drafts until a running back goes. Because I think that almost turns the light switch on. Like as soon as either Benson or Brooks or whoever goes, I think that's going to bring everybody's awareness to, okay, now it's time to start drafting running backs. I get this class isn't that great, but look at the last 3 or 4 years. The NFL is evolving and we're getting quality. We're getting Kyron Williams in the 5th round or the 4th round of the NFL draft. There's later and later and later guys being drafted and once given the opportunity are producing. So not everybody's going to be Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson, but they don't have to be.
Right.
They work in the right system and get the ball. They get touches, they'll be fine.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. I don't have a lot to add to these two guys. I think there's opportunity to be had. I do agree with Benson in Arizona that he's got to fight through some other guys to get touches, but I don't think any of those guys are they're not Mount Everest to climb over, right? They're aging, injuries, all that type of stuff. So there's opportunity for both of those. My issue is that even if you're not a Xavier Leggette fan, who I take here at 206, when the hell have we ever had the opportunity to get a first round receiver at 206 in a rookie draft? This guy, whether you like him or not, the NFL was high enough on him. There was other teams that had him on as a first round talent. Love listening to him talk. I had never heard him talk until some of these interviews after he got drafted. And again, seems like another fun kid. Lower floor, but there's a very high ceiling with Xavier. And the fact that we can get him at 206 is just, it's awesome. What do you think about Xavier Leggette, Sully?
I have concerns. I have a lot of concerns about a guy who doesn't really do anything in college until 1 year, breaks out late like he did. It's a bad comparison, but this reminds me so much of Kadarius Toney, a guy that went in the first round that I don't think should have, that had 1 year of college productivity. But that said, I think Leggette, where he ended up is probably good for him because no one's expecting them to do anything of significance anytime soon. So they could probably bring him along slowly with a nice new running back that they have and a quarterback that I'm pretty down on that some people still aren't. So I think that it's an okay spot for him. I don't like Xavier Leggette in the back half or the back part of the first round of rookie drafts, like where he went in our last mock. I will hammer the draft button for Xavier Leggette at 206 every single draft. So sooner or later, everybody becomes a value. And I think from about pick 203 down is when he starts becoming a value. I would probably take him over Keon Coleman. It would be a discussion for myself internally. But yeah, and he could go before those running backs too. Like he's in this range for sure. This is an immense value. So easy. Yep.
Yeah,
Nice.
I like Xavier Leggette. I mean, he's got the body type that we all love in wide receivers. 6'3", 225 pounds. That's a big boy out there. And he was drafted in the first round for a reason. It's like, he and Keon Coleman were drafted essentially back to back, right? I mean, was he the last pick in the first round, and then Keon Coleman was the first pick in the second?
Yeah, it was real close.
For some reason, Carolina traded up to pick the guy they could have got if they just stayed there. But
it was strange. Maybe they thought the Bills were going to take him. I don't know. But I mean, when you're talking about a first round wide receiver, you get in the middle of the second, how can you go wrong? And then this offense is looking a lot different than last year. I mean, you go from Adam Thielen and DJ Chark now to Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Xavier Leggette. I mean, Jonathan Mingo kind of was coming along at the end of last year as well, with now a running back that I can't imagine plays any worse than the running backs last year. Let's just hope the offensive line pulls it together for Bryce Young to at least look somewhat serviceable. I mean, he had some games at the end of last year as well. Bryce Young did that didn't look too bad. So Xavier Leggette is a good value out here in the middle of the second round, big time.
All right, so now we're midway through the second round of this draft. we're going to get through these 3 rounds. So we're going to have to speed it up quite a bit to get this last round and a half in. So now that we're midway, we're going to speed it up. Obviously, a lot of these guys, there's less talk, right? It's opportunity. There may be some other good stuff to talk. There's some guys in here that I still like, very talented, but we're gonna have to speed up there. So AD Mitchell, Sully, 207, goes to the Colts after falling in the NFL draft. Somebody that people thought was going to go quite a bit higher than he went. Why are you taking him here at 207?
I just like the player, and I'm not in love with the player, but again, this is a value pick for me. I think he lands in a really good spot in terms of Indianapolis's offense. Becomes their third passing option, might even evolve into their second passing option, depending on how Josh Downs continues to develop. I like Anthony Richardson. I like AD Mitchell. I like his body style. Again, he's not the greatest route runner in the world, but he's kind of Keon Coleman-ish, high pointing, and can't deny the fact that AD Mitchell scores touchdowns, and that's okay for fantasy football. So I like him. He's a good value. I don't have a ton to say. I wouldn't have a ton to say if I was trying to argue the other side either, but I think he's a good value at this spot.
Bryce, just real quick, give us a little on AD Mitchell, and then go ahead and jump right into your 208, which is Jalyn Polk there for New England. So what do you think about AD Mitchell? And then tell us a little bit about Polk.
Yeah, AD Mitchell I thought was going to be a guy I would be taking at the end of the first round in Superflex drafts, early second. But with how he slid in the real draft, again, like I said earlier, these scouts and NFL teams know more than me. So that raised concern for me, which I feel like this is an appropriate draft spot for him as well. I feel like in this area we are, I think he does have the most raw talent. I will say that. So the opportunity for him to be the second best pass catcher on that team is definitely something I hope to look forward to for him. And then I jump into Jalyn Polk, a guy that was drafted before AD Mitchell and wasn't really expected to. Another guy who wasn't the number one on his respected team because Odunze was there. But Jalyn Polk finds himself in a spot where the Patriots need a number one wide receiver to step up. So he's got the body type and he had really good numbers out of all the number two receivers on their respected teams. It seemed like he put up, I'm not sure what Brian Thomas Jr.'s numbers were, but Jalyn Polk put up over 1,000 yards and quite a bit of touchdowns. So hopefully that can transfers in the NFL and he can be a nice guy to pair with another rookie quarterback in Drake Maye. Sully, what are your thoughts on Jalyn Polk?
I like Polk, and I think this, back to the Michael Penix thing, his ability to get so much out of his receiving core. The third receiver in Washington, too, I believe his name is McMillan, was injured a little bit, but also a productive receiver. So Polk is a good route runner. He's got really good hands, and I think that he's going to be a really good complement to either Jacoby Brissett or to Drake Maye in New England. So I think it'll be good.
Yeah. So for me, again, we're looking at a wide receiver core in New England that we're waiting for somebody to come be the dude. Right. And I think that Polk has that opportunity. Again, a guy that would probably be getting drafted higher if he didn't have Odunze on his team, because he would have been the focal part of that passing game in Washington. So I'm with you there. Next up at 209, I'm going with Jaylen Wright, running back, Miami Dolphins. And this is just simple speed. And we know Miami loves speed. And we know they love speed at running back. And we've seen what Achane did after he got opportunity last year. Not saying that Jaylen Wright's going to be the same thing, but they win in a lot of the same ways. And I want pieces of this offense. And while Mostert's there right now, by 2025, this could be an Achane Wright split backfield. They don't care if it's one guy or multiple guys doing it, as long as they can do it. And I feel like that's just a lot of upside at the running back position. Getting him late in the third or second round here. So, Sully, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jaylen Wright and then go into your 210 pick, Troy Franklin, wide receiver, Denver Broncos.
Jaylen Wright is who I was looking at coming up on this pick because of the things that you mentioned. I just like his speed and his ability to fit in Miami's offense. And if one thing Miami does well is they get the ball to these speed guys in space. And Jaylen Wright he might not get a ton of touches, and he might not average 16 yards a carry like Devon Achane did, but he's going to have a role in that offense. And Raheem Mostert's 32, 33 years old, and whether he plays this year or not, probably not long for Miami. So I really like him. That's why I targeted him. But Troy Franklin is a guy, to me, like A.D. Mitchell, who just kept sliding. And Troy Franklin at one point was my 4th ranked wide receiver in this class. That's where I kind of started my evals. And then he kind of, like the NFL, he kind of slid down my board a little bit too. But familiarity with the offense, with the quarterback, the situation he's going to in Denver, other than Cortland Sutton, there's not a ton there. And I think, if Bo Nix is going to get the ball out in a hurry like Sean Payton wants to do and Bo Nix wants to do, he's going to be looking for the guy that he just looked at 100 and who knows how many times last couple of years in Oregon. So that's why Troy Franklin was my pick here. It just seemed like the right value and the right fit, especially late in the second round.
So quickly on Troy Franklin, I'll say I agree. I'm docking him as that draft's going on and he's dropping, but then when he gets picked by Denver and gets to match back up with Bo Nix, I give him a little bit of that knockback, right? Because now while he did drop, he goes into a really good situation. So Bryce, why don't you tell us a little bit about Troy Franklin and then get into your 211 pick, Ben Sinnot, tight end out of Washington. Go ahead.
Yeah, this kind of fell right to me. I really like Ben Sinnot. He's again, we really like when we get rookies paired with rookie quarterbacks. I mean, rookie pass catchers paired with rookie quarterbacks, and we get that here at the tight end that the Commanders take in this guy. And he was taken in the second round nonetheless. So at the very end of the second round of a Superflex draft, you're getting a tight end that was also taken in the second round. And the path to getting on the field and getting targets is pretty good early in his career. Not to mention he's getting mentored by Zach Ertz, who just seems like the best tight end mentor that there is. Dallas Goedert, Trey McBride as of recent. So really like the landing spot for him and the path to targets. So any thoughts on Sinnot before you get into your next pick, Rick?
Yeah, he's my second favorite tight end in this class. I've snagged him in a couple spots so far already. I think he's a big value because not only did he go in the second round, and not only does he have a pretty good chance to get on the field early, but this isn't a guy that you're asking to block a lot either. Like, he's going to be running routes. He's going to be a weapon in the passing game. And it is kind of funny when you look at Dallas Goedert and you look at Trey McBride, like, Ben could be the next in line to do that same kind of thing. And again, getting him at the end of the second round. This is a guy in most drafts that's probably in the first round, right? When there's a normal amount of running backs and other positions, when there's only 2 quarterbacks and there's only 3 wide receivers and a couple of running backs, this guy is a guy that you're talking about at the end of the first round in a lot of years. So very talented. So, yep, I love him. And then at 212, I'm going Malachi Corley, wide receiver, New York Jets. Obviously, they've got Garrett Wilson there, but once you get past Garrett Wilson, they're looking for that number 2. But they brought in Mike Williams, but he's not on the field all the time. So they really need that secure number 2, number 3 guy to fill in for at number 2 when Mike Williams is not playing. And they were excited. They were trying to trade up for this guy. Couldn't get it done or on the first few tries, and then finally got it done, and they were ecstatic to get him. So they are super excited. Not that teams aren't when they get guys, right? But like, you can tell when a team's like, I really don't want to lose out on this guy, and they're trying to move up. And you watch that build, they're super exciting to be in that offense. Obviously, you've got Aaron Rodgers there for the early years of his career. We've seen how young wide receivers have blossomed with Rodgers at the helm, especially of late. I mean, people forget Davante Adams took 3 years, right? Like, didn't happen right away for Davante Adams. Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams will say Aaron Rodgers kind of brought that out of him to get the most out of him. So that's a good thing for Corley to be around early in his career. And to get him at 212 is just a steal for me, in my opinion. So, Sully, why don't you tell us a little bit about Malachi Corley and what you think about him, and then get into your 301 pick, Jermaine Burton.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Malachi Corley guy, to be honest, but at 212 and in a Jets offense with Aaron Rodgers, I think it's absolutely worth taking the shot on. I think what Corley may struggle with is the vast majority of his production in college came around the line of scrimmage and not a lot of ADOT to it. And Aaron Rodgers has never really been a check down to wide receiver kind of guy. He's more of a check down to anything to the running back. That said, touches are touches. And if he can get the ball and he can make things happen, then he'll be fine. He just needs to make sure that he holds on to a couple early, or he might lose favor of his quarterback. So that's always the danger with a rookie quarterback and a guy like Aaron Rodgers. Jermaine Burton is arguably one of the better talented wide receivers from the neck down in this class, to be totally honest with you. It's got some off-field stuff that if people want to know about, they can research and look into. We don't need to beat out here. But he's a good player and a great landing spot who probably is the third wide receiver on that team right now. Could very easily find himself as a number 2 wide receiver on that team if they move on from, why can't I remember the name of that wide receiver right now? It's totally out of my brain.
T. Higgins.
Thank you. If T. Higgins goes anywhere this year or next, I think Burton could slide in with Burrow and Chase and be a pretty good piece in that offense. So he's close to who Bryce took next in Roman Wilson. So Bryce, I'll let you go about Burton and then go into Wilson. And I think we're clumping together these guys as we get this late in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I like Jermaine Burton here as well. We find him in a spot where Tyler Boyd's. I don't think he's signed anywhere yet, but he's likely gone. Yeah. And then T. Higgins is unhappy. So Jermaine Burton, who knows, by the start of the season could be the Bengals' second option. Unlikely, but possible. Even if he is the third option, we saw that Tyler Boyd was active in that offense. So Jermaine Burton, as a young talented receiver, they could try and groom him early into becoming the second option the following year, with them unlikely to probably keep T. Higgins the next year, even if they do keep him this year. So really like that pick in the third round. And then, going next to Roman Wilson, I really like, again, when I'm looking at guys like in the late second and the third round, I'm looking at the path to targets. And Roman Wilson, has a good one. His just issue is he's just not very big guy. He's a really small wide receiver. He's going to be playing slot for sure. He's not big enough to be on the outside, but we see him in an offense where they've also lost some wide receivers this offseason. We got George Pickens there, who is a big outside receiver. So they need a guy to run through the middle and catch the ball and be a good route runner like that Deontay Johnson that they had. So, Roman Wilson could find himself as like a big steal in the third round and contribute to your team early.
And to speak on that, the Steelers, right? They are another team. I talked about the 49ers being real good at identifying wide receivers. Nobody's been better at identifying wide receivers over the past decade as Pittsburgh, right? And the only issues have been up here when you're talking about Antonio Brown and you're talking about Chase Claypool. Like, the raw talent has, everybody that they've picked has showed raw talent. The Martavis Bryant, raw talent, but couldn't get it with the weed. So that's the only issues they've ever had with their receivers. They pick really talented receivers, and they rarely miss on these guys. So that's a good sign for Roman Wilson being in Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin. Great opportunity there. So a great pick at 302 with a lot of upside. Then at 303, I go with Marshawn Lloyd, running back, Green Bay Packers, coming out of USC. Another guy that is kind of hard to figure out. At times, he was the number 1 running back in this class and was talked about at a much higher level. Green Bay has some other running backs in the backfield. Another reason why he's dropping with Josh Jacobs and AJ Dillon. I think, though, again, this is a guy that if you're willing to just grab him, put him on your taxi squad and wait till 2025, could have a big role in this Green Bay offense. So I love taking shots on him in the late second, early third round of drafts. Sully, why don't you tell us a little bit about him and then your next pick at 304?
Yeah, I like Lloyd a lot. And there's a lot of people out there in this industry that have Lloyd as one of their top running backs in this class. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. He was pretty darn good in the tape that I watched at USC. He could catch the ball, he could run the ball, he could do a lot of things. A good sized guy. I think he'll make people forget about AJ Dillon in Green Bay pretty quickly. He's who I wanted to take. I thought it was an immense value in the early third round. So I defaulted at the next pick and took Blake Corum, who I'm a lot less interested in, to be totally honest with you, as a prospect. sometimes landing spot works for you. And I think that Blake Corum is sort of a Kyren Williams clone, for lack of a better term. So, and I think that's what made him interesting to the Rams. If anything happens to Kyren, whether they want to reduce his workload or if he's injured again like he was last season, Corum can slide in and nothing changes in the offense. So being one injury or a series of rest away from being the Rams running back is worth it for me in the third round. So Corum was easy for me to take, even though I don't really like the player too much.
Yeah, I mean, for both those running backs, I would say that they're one injury away from being a lot more valuable and being a huge steal for a third round draft pick for sure. I think just Corum is a less explosive version of Kyren Williams is the only thing I would say. I think they very similar builds and harder to bring down running backs. It's just I don't think Corum's got that gear change, or he didn't shift gears as fast as Kyren. So that's the only thing is I don't see him stealing his job. And when you again the path to seeing the field is really good for these guys. Just probably not this upcoming season.
One second. I just want to say Corum. The thing that Corum and Kyren have in common is they have a nose for the end zone.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. They're extremely hard workers. They are extremely tough, compact, and they're just they play every run is hard, and that's
right.
They complement each other that way. Where they're not going to have any running backs taking plays off like I think we've seen from Cam Akers and some other situations in that Rams offense. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to pivot back to the wide receiver position, and I went Javon Baker here. I guess you could call it a homer pick, but
this is 305.
Pick 305 with Javon Baker. And when you're looking at this player, this guy was recruited to Alabama, so he came out of college as a pretty high recruit. Obviously, transferred to UCF and had a really good senior season. Put up over 1,000, or I don't know if it was senior season, but his last season he put up over 1,000 yards, over 50 catches, found the end zone a few times. But when you go into the New England Patriots, like I was saying earlier about Jalyn Polk, they need someone to step up. We're not expecting to see it from this guy, but it wouldn't surprise me. He's got the build to be an alpha receiver, and maybe he's got the raw talent, but he definitely has the attitude, because he was saying that he could be a top 10 receiver in the NFL. So we like to see that from 6th-round draft picks, I guess. So, again, it's a dart throw, this late into these rookie drafts. And this is a dart this is one I like to aim for.
Again, I completely agree with you, because Baker is in a spot where they're searching for that guy. And I like taking shots on these guys when the team is searching for that guy, because you just never know which one's going to end up that guy, or maybe two of them do. So I love taking shots on Baker in the middle of the third round, 305 here, not going to argue with it. Next up, I go a little bit off the board, a guy that people aren't talking about a whole lot. But Kimani Vidal, running back out of Troy, not the big name school that you're looking for, but we're talking about a guy that had 4,000 yards rushing in college. He had another, we're talking, 700, 92 receptions, 700 yards. He can do a bit of everything. And I think he was already kind of underrated because of playing at Troy and everything like that. But he goes to the Chargers, which is one of the best situations for a running back this year. Can you imagine where Jonathan Brooks would be if he landed on the Chargers this offseason? So again, it's middle of the third round at 306. If Kimani Vidal gets the opportunity to start for the Chargers, it could be similar to like Austin Eckler when he was with the Chargers, right? He's not as explosive as Eckler is, but I'm talking about that later round pick, less known name that ended up working into a very prominent role with the Chargers. So I'll take shots on him in the mid third all the time. I think the earliest I took him was, I actually have that draft up right here. I took him at 309. I got him at in this one. So that makes me even happier. I thought it was a little bit earlier, but he's definitely a guy that I'm going to be looking at waivers. He went undrafted in some of my leagues that only had 3 rounds, 1 QB. I I'll be dumping big parts of my budget on him. I hope people in my leagues don't watch.
I think it's very possible that Vidal is the number one running back on the Chargers by season's end. I think it's incredibly possible that J.K. Dobbins doesn't even make the roster based on his injury history and the poor guy just not being able to stay on the field. And Gus Edwards is not exactly a spring chicken. I understand that there's a familiarity between those two running backs with that offensive coordinator and that family of bloodline of coaching, and that's why they're there. Sure. But Vidal, it reminds me a little bit about Jaleel McLaughlin last year, although a totally different type of player. But anybody who has that much productivity in college, I don't care where they went to school, can play football. And Vidal has 33 touchdowns, 92 catches. You said 4,000 yards. I don't care if he went to Troy or I don't care where he went. He obviously can play. So this entire third round, like the next guy I took here with the 307 is Spencer Rattler. Again, it's someone who I think has the path to playing in the NFL sooner rather than later. I don't think Derek Carr lasts in New Orleans that long. This entire third round, as we're going through it, has a previous year's second round feel to me. Like Spencer Rattler, here's where I go a little bit crazy. I'll take him over Michael Penix because I think he plays sooner than Penix. And I think he has the ability to produce for my fantasy team sooner than Michael Penix. Not at all as talented as Michael Penix, but I don't get anything out of bench points in my league. So that's why I took Rattler here, because I think he's a value this late in a super flex rookie draft in the third round.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Spencer Rattler in the third. I really like him earlier in the third. I probably just overlooked him when I was looking at some of these other draft picks I picked, because it wouldn't surprise me if we see him on the field this upcoming season. I mean, if Derek Carr's looking too good and the Saints suck, and it's obvious they got to move on from him, why would you not try out a rookie quarterback that's on your bench? If you lose, it just helps your draft position, right? So it makes sense to see that we could see Spencer Rattler on the field here in this upcoming season. Dude's got a tremendous amount of raw talent. It just seems like he just couldn't consistently put it together in college. So we'll see. But given the opportunity, he could surprise some people. And for a third round pick, if he doesn't work out, who cares? So, and speaking of the third round pick, I got a third round wide receiver that was drafted in the real draft, and Luke McCaffrey here by the Commanders. Kind of similar to my Ben Sinnot pick. We really like when we pair rookies with rookies, and same team, same quarterback, right? With the Commanders and Jayden Daniels with Luke McCaffrey. Hopefully the talent runs in that family, and this guy can work his way on the field. I haven't really watched a ton of film on this guy, and I'll be honest, there's probably a lot of these guys in the third round I haven't paid too much attention for, because like beating a dead horse, we just look for path to get on the field and prove themselves at this point. And with Terry McLaurin not getting any younger, I'm not sure what his contract is looking like. And Jahan Dotson hasn't really flashed as a second option on that team. Maybe somebody could, a guy like Luke McCaffrey could step up and get significant playing time here in this upcoming season.
There is something to be said about knowing how to prepare as an NFL player, right? And that's what Luke McCaffrey has that these other guys don't. And I do want to clarify, Bryce doesn't like telling you guys what pick number it is, but this is 308. 308. And you don't get that, you don't get what he's got. A dad that played in the league, a brother that is the best running back in the league. You don't get that for a guy a lot. So Luke knows the work that it's going to take to be great in the NFL. And while the raw talent might not be as high as a lot of these other receivers were taken, again, Luke McCaffrey is a guy that we're taking, like you said, Sully, in the second round of most rookie drafts in past years. Yep. So to get him at 308 with that kind of knowledge of what needs to be done to perform well in the league is a good thing. Next up, I go back to tight end. Ja'Tavion Sanders as the number 3 tight end off the board. And again, it's a lot like Ben Sinnot, like you said, in the second round, late second. Ain't nobody asking Ja'Tavion Sanders to block all the time. Like, he's going to be running a lot of routes for a team that is like the Patriots, looking for those top options in the offense. Obviously, they have Adam Thielen that has been consistent, but he's up there in age. The Xavier Leggette in the first round this year. But after you get past that, the Jonathan Mingos, everybody else needs to kind of prove themselves. And they have not had a tight end since Greg Olsen left that they could count on. And I think Sanders might be that guy. So shots on him in the late third, I'll take all day. But next, Sully, you go to Buffalo. Or first, what do you have to say about Sanders? And then tell us about who you pick out of Buffalo at 310.
Yeah, a bit of concerns about Sanders. I probably have Eric All a little bit ahead of him, but at the same time, this is the back of the third round of a Superflex draft. Like, what do you think you're getting here? A little bit of concern in Carolina, and I think maybe he does need to block, because we'll see how that offensive line progresses from one year to the next. But they probably put a different tight end on the field if he needs to be an extension of the offensive line. But Sanders is incredibly talented, and sooner rather than later, probably is going to produce for you, and it's going to bring you value. What are we at? 309? You're not getting much better at 309, so I think Sanders is a good pick. I went with Ray Davis with the 310, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of throwing a dart here. He's a bit of an older running back, one of those COVID casualties, stayed in college for a long time. He's getting a lot of run for his pass catching ability, and people are kind of connecting the dots in Buffalo that he's going to catch some passes. It might be a little bit of a danger to James Cook. I don't think he is, but at 310, I'm going to try to find out.
And yeah, I mean, I really don't know a ton about Ray Davis, but I don't know of any backup running backs in Buffalo. So if you can scoop that one up in the end of the third round, that's pretty good, especially if he's second in line. Especially how we saw once Ken Dorsey took over, how he was super firm about establishing the run game. He ain't got a choice but to do it again this upcoming season. It gets cold in Buffalo, and it's easy to get injured when it's cold. So, and James Cook is not some big back. So scooping up their backup's a good dive there. And then I start to finish up the third round with the pick 311 in Brenden Rice. There's probably a handful of guys, most of you guys would have took over this guy. But one thing Brenden Rice did that you mentioned that Blake Corum and Kyron Williams did is he found the end zone. I mean, he ended this last season with 12 touchdowns, which is a ton. Just didn't really have a lot of yards and receptions to go with it, but he did have Caleb Williams throwing him the ball, so that probably helps. And maybe it hurt his draft capital in the sense of they just thought, oh, he had Caleb Williams making him look good. Maybe he's better than some people think. He's got it in the bloodline, right? But we'll see if that comes to fruition. But this is the end of the third round. I don't believe there's such a thing as a bad pick at this point. So what are your thoughts about Brenden Rice, Rick? And what do you finish this mock draft with?
Yeah, so, I think for me, it's a little bit early for Brenden Rice. There are some guys that are on the board that I do like more than Brenden Rice. But again, none of these guys are for sure things. So if he's your guy at this point, take your guy. Like, this is also fantasy, so it should be fun. And you're kind of doubling down on the bloodline, right? Where you take Luke McCaffrey with the last pick, and then you come back with Brenden Rice at this pick, and maybe if we went a little bit deeper, you'd go with Frank Gore Jr. at your next pick. But those guys, I love taking shots on those guys late in these drafts, right? Because I think there is something to say about that, and having that knowledge of what needs to be done, and who did it better than Jerry Rice at the wide receiver position. And maybe Brenden is just a later bloomer than some other guys. That all that happens too. So not gonna knock it. There are some guys like who I'm taking at 312, Malik Washington, that I do like more. But again, Malik Washington may never be anything. But we're looking at a Dolphins offense that they were absolutely ecstatic to get Malik Washington too. But Tyreek Hill probably isn't playing a whole lot longer. So this is, again, the third round. I get a very talented guy that I think, is obviously going higher in most normal drafts. But if he's got the speed, if he can get it figured out before Tyreek's gone, him and Waddle could be a pretty dynamic duo for a high-flying Miami Dolphins offense. So while the floor is extremely low, and by low, I mean like non-existent, Malik Washington is a guy that has a lot of upside for where you're getting him in these rookie drafts. So that's who we're going to close out the third round with. I'll make sure to put each round up here so that you can see all three. There's going to be an article on rotoheat.com too that'll have all the info in it of who we drafted and some little tidbits from what we talked about. But to close it out, do any of you guys have anything you want to say about Malik Washington? And then any picks that weren't on the board that you thought are guys that could be in here, but we'll close this out real quick.
I can't really think of anybody off the top of my head that I would have taken over these. I think Malik Washington at 312 has the potential to be one of the best values of all of the 36 players we've talked about. Very much like Jalyn Wright, get the ball in his hands in space. Malik Washington is a yards after the catch monster, so he could be a massive home run at 312.
Bryce, anything?
Nope.
Or you
Oh
just
no.
staring at the
I
screen?
said it as he said. I was like, no, I don't have anything to add.
So I do want to name just a few guys that I seen go in some of my drafts real quick. We've got Isaac Guerendo.
Yep, that's fair.
Guerendo. Running back San Francisco. He went 211 in one of my Superflex drafts. Didn't go here in our mock draft. Another guy that went was Jalen McMillan. He was like 307 mid round 3. Didn't go in ours. And then guys like Audric Estime, Cade Stover's another tight end prospect that I like. Eric All that you mentioned before that didn't go. These are all guys that you're going to see go in the third rounds of drafts that didn't make it into our mock, but that whole grouping there is so big of guys that are, really talented with upside, but maybe their situations aren't as good or didn't get the draft capital that some other guys got. But those are some other. Bucky Irving, Jordan Travis is another like shot that I like to take at quarterback. So there are some other guys that can fit in and go in third rounds of drafts that didn't go in ours.
Yeah, Joe Milton too.
Joe Milton. Yep.
Yeah.
So anything else to add, guys?
Nope.
All right.
I think it was good.
That was great. We figured it out about midway through. We figured it out and then got her moving. So we'll be back next week.